Welcome to A Breath of Fresh Jacob, where we take community-submitted ideas
That's you.
and we make small videos out of them. Because why not? We go through all the submissions, take out the shitty ones, and with what we have left, we randomly pick one. Speaking of randomly picking one, our very first topic comes from Nightman Flock and says, hard games, artificial difficulty versus real difficulty. What are the breaking points for you on a good hard game versus a bad hard game? This is a really good question. Something that I think is important to say first, though, is that what one person might find difficult, another might not. For example, Nightman Flock, I'm sure thinks that Mega Man isn't that difficult because somebody's an expert at the game series, and then there's someone like me that sucks at just pretty much every Mega Man game he's ever played up to this point. So I think they're difficult, but you probably don't, just as an example. With that said, I think a game that gives a good example of good difficulty or real difficulty is actually Dark Souls. The way that it teaches you as you play, but without being up in your face about it, is really nice. You learn as you go. The game never feels impossible, which is nice. But as far as artificial difficulty goes, I actually don't think it has that. I know some people would argue that it does because the game is hard. But I think it's important to take a look at what artificial difficulty is, at least for me. Number one example I can think of, I'm actually going to use Mega Man. I don't think Mega Man has a lot of artificial difficulty, but I am going to use it as an example along with, let's say, original Super Mario Bros. To show you guys an idea of something that's kind of antiquated now, and that is lives and game overs. You die, you lose a number that of an arbitrary thing, in this case a life or whatever, and if you run out of those, you lose a shitload of progress. That's unfortunate. Now, it varies from game to game, but the point is you lose progress. This is important. It's going to be on the test. We'll come back to that. Another example of artificial difficulty, I feel, is the illusion of time. Creating a scenario that takes time is artificial difficulty. Now, that's not to say that just because a game exists and has time in it, that it's hard or overly difficult or unfair. What I mean by that is anytime a game takes your time and wastes it, it gives you the illusion of difficulty. Another way that artificial difficulty can present itself is purely through a numbers game. And the numbers game is very, very important because something that I feel is important to a good hard game is a balance, a ratio of your time and your effort. If you're fighting a boss in a game and it takes you 45 minutes to kill this boss, it doesn't necessarily mean the boss was hard, it just took a long time to do. And because it took a long time to do, it felt like it was something that it wasn't. Right? I think that there is an inherent tie between risk and difficulty. If you are in a situation in a video game, and whatever it is that you're doing has some kind of risk tied to it, that gives you the feeling of difficulty. And that can be both good and bad. In the old days, that risk was losing your progress. Now, that did create a bit of artificial difficulty. Now, if you're fighting the final boss of, I don't know, Final Fantasy VIII, best game ever, and you're getting close to the end, but you're running out of supplies, or you're low on health, that tension, that risk of, do I keep fighting, or do I use what little healing I have left now? Can I survive another hit from this boss? And that makes it feel like more of an ordeal. It makes it feel more difficult, because if you're always at max health, it's not an ordeal at all. Who cares? Which, speaking of JRPGs, I feel that gameplay becoming a numbers game is a horrible artificial difficulty. I'm going to actually use Uncharted as an example because we played it recently and it's still fresh in my mind. You shoot a random guy 7 times in the head and nothing happens. You throw a grenade between a dude's legs and it goes off and nothing happens because the enemies have so much health. It is not hard to fight them. It is not difficult to fight them. The scenario you find yourself in is not a difficult one, but it is purely a numbers game because they have too much health, so you just sit there and you waste your time. Which brings us back to things like waiting. Waiting is something that sucks. Why do you think so many people hate the DMV? Because you have to sit there and you have to wait all the time. And it's infamous for it. And that's why everybody hates to go to the DMV, because nobody likes having their time wasted. Especially me. I'm one of the most impatient people on the planet. So having your time wasted gives you the feeling that something was an ordeal. When you think about going to the DMV, you're like, oh my God, right? So to go back to the second part of your question, what are the breaking points for me on a good hard game versus a bad hard game? That's really interesting because I feel like it has to do with how long a particular action takes. If you are moving from point A to point B in a game, and there's like 7 standard enemies in your way, and each one you have to stop and deal with, does the game make it feel like it's worth your time? I'll give you an example. Let's look at Castlevania Symphony of the Night. You're going down a hallway, there's a bunch of skelly boys, right? They don't take a long time to kill. You hit them, you move on. But when you get to a boss, that takes a lot of time. That does a lot. But it should. Bosses are where that difficulty is meant to exist. So there is a balance between the health that a standard enemy has and the health that a boss has. And that makes sense. That's why bosses are these ordeals that you remember. You remember fighting a boss. You don't remember fighting 73 skeletons in the hallway before you get to the boss. Who cares about that? You care about the boss. That's what's interesting. That's what's fun. That is where the difficulty should lie. So an example of when a hard game becomes bad through artificial difficulty is not just when it wastes your time, but when the distinction of events is gone. When the whole game just feels like, oh, Uncharted is a great example of that because every single combat scenario felt the same. Even when there was a boss fight, it was just mash a button and then press a different button, and mash a button and press a different button. That's what every other fight was. There was no distinction. Yeah, it's happening to a different character, or it's happening to a different monster or whatever, but the scenario is exactly the same. The inputs are exactly the same. The way that you do everything is exactly the same. And because it doesn't change, it loses its spark, it loses its luster, and it's no longer fun. But look at Mega Man, just as an example. You know, you make your way through a stage, shooting your lemons at everything, right? They're not that bad to kill. You might have a few that are significantly tougher than the others as you make your way through, possibly a mini-boss. But when you get to that boss, the music changes, the scenario changes, and you're up against something that makes you feel like you have to earn the victory. And that is so crucial. Because every other enemy on the way in didn't make you feel like that. Only the boss does. That is separating the from the yeah. And I'm keeping that in because I'm an idiot. And having that distinction is so important. As I mentioned, there needs to be an appropriate ratio of the amount of time you spend doing something before it feels stale, and that line, that thin line of when you go past it and you're just like, oh, because you never want to feel that in a game. You never ever want to feel that in a game. Now, I'll give you a gray area example just for fun. I think that RNG is a gray area. Integrating random number generation into a scenario can introduce real and artificial difficulty at the same time, purely because it's random. So if 2 people playing this game that has this random element that creates a difficult situation, like maybe how much health a boss spawns with, someone might get a really unlucky roll and it makes that fight so difficult, or it makes the puzzle so difficult. That can be discouraging. It creates a whole lot of artificial difficulty around a scenario. That's unfortunate. But someone else playing the exact same game in the exact same way up to that point gets a lucky roll and the boss spawns with half health or something like that, or the puzzle's half solved, or something like that, some other good RNG example. And they have absolutely no problem with that section of the game. In fact, it's so easy they don't even remember that section of the game. They had no idea that it was RNG based. Completely different experiences for completely different people because of the way that difficulty was presented to them. And what I think is really interesting about that for me is games that do their difficulty differently. Some people like the artificial difficulty that a particular game provides, like maybe a life system or a game over system. That's just what they're used to. I mean, Crash Bandicoot has that. I wouldn't really say that's a hard game, but Mega Man does, and it's a hard game. But some people like the added challenge of knowing that if they screw up, they lose progress. It is artificial difficulty, but it's not necessarily bad. That's why, with this particular topic, and why I like it, is it's so subjective. Because what one person might find difficult in a particular situation, another person might find it really, really fun and engaging. Some people like their RPG fights to last an hour and a half. Final Fantasy XII. But other people want a more linear, a more condensed adventure in what they're doing. They don't want to do any grinding. They just want on that set path. They don't want to feel like there's artificial difficulty presented in the way of increasing the numbers of the attack or the defense or the health of an enemy. They want the whole game to just flow from point A to point B. Chrono Trigger is a fantastic example of that. At no point in that game do you need to grind so long as you fight every enemy you encounter along the way. At no point do you hit a brick wall and the game just says, lol, we're padding the game. Which there's another thing that I can't stand in video games. Padding. When a game overstays its welcome purely for more time. So that way the game is longer and you feel like it was a more epic adventure than it should have been. Oh my god, padding. And while we're on the topic of that, let's talk about backtracking. Backtracking is kind of sort of artificial difficulty. I mean, my god, instead of making 3 areas, all you have to do is make 2 areas and make the person go to the second area and then just go back to the first. Why make a third area when you can just repeat the same shit, you lazy fuck? I'm okay. I feel like I've been rambling for a long time. I just looked down at the record button and it's very long. My editor's gonna have a great time with this. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. I know I got a little off topic, but I was having a good time. So to answer your question, what are the breaking points for me on a good hard game versus a bad hard game? Fun. I know that's a weird answer, but honestly, when a game outstays its welcome and no longer feels fun, that's when I start noticing all the artificial difficulties. And when I start noticing every little hole that's wrong with a game, it all falls apart. And to me, that's what breaks it for me. So keeping the game fun and engaging is what makes a hard game good. Dark Souls. But making a game repeat the same thing over and over and over, or making you spend so much time on something so insignificant, Uncharted, that to me is the difference between real difficulty and artificial difficulty. And I hope that answered your question sufficiently. But alas, that's all the time we have for this episode. We'll try this again next week, and I'm rather liking it so far, and I hope you guys are too. Remember that submissions open on Monday during the stream, so make sure you stop by the stream to get the link. It'll be different every week, so you can submit your idea. And if yours didn't get picked, shut the fuck up! I just died in my brain. Oh, God, love. Am I forgetting anything? Make sure you stop by, get your submissions in, and if yours didn't get picked, don't worry. It doesn't mean I didn't like it. So feel free to put it in for the next week's, and the next week's, and the next week's, until yours gets picked. I want everybody to have a chance, but I can only talk about one topic a week, so keep them coming. But that's all the time we have for this episode. So just remember, you know the rules, and so do I. See you next time. That felt so dumb, but I kind of want to keep it.